And welcome everybody to this episode of Coming Home with John Allen. I want to thank you all for being here. I also want to remind you that if you look in the description of this episode, you'll see several links that you can click on if you would like to contribute and support the work that I'm doing. You'll also find other links taking you straight to other things that I'm doing, like the Loyal comic strip, for example, things like that. So check the description of this episode. Now, today's episode is the first installment of a series of broadcasts and episodes that I'm going to do on the topic of masculinity. Thank you all for being here. Enjoy the conversation. This is the Coming Home Podcast with John Allen. And here I am with Christin Anderson. Christin, you are the project coordinator at Papillon Bergen. I'm sure that keeps you very busy, and I am so thankful that you took a little time to come and talk with me here about masculinity. Thank you so much for being here. Masculinity, toxic or not, is it under siege? If so, why? If not, why do you think it's not? Talk to me a little bit about your views on masculinity and toxic masculinity, because they're two different things.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing to clarify what we're talking about when we say toxic masculinity, because I think a lot of people hear that and just maybe understand it as calling masculinity itself toxic. Yeah. Which is, of course, not true and not the case. Toxic masculinity is a way of examining the ways in which we socialize boys and men in ways that ultimately harm them and lead to harm in society. So I think it's really, I'm a mom to 3 boys. I'm raising 3 little boys. So it's something that I've thought about a lot. What does it mean to be raising boys, raising men? And as a thought experiment, thinking, is there anything that I would teach them that I wouldn't teach a daughter if I had a girl?
Yes.
And to be honest, I've really thought about this for a long time, and I haven't come to anything yet. But it's something I'm still, my boys are still really young. But I think that this is actually a really important conversation that more of us need to be involved in.
I agree. That's why we're doing this. Yeah.
Because from my perspective, I don't see masculinity under attack or under siege. I see people doing their best. Language is imperfect. It's evolving, but doing their best to have a conversation about, we talk about gender as a social construct. Gender evolves. It's different from culture to culture, from generation to generation. And now in our context, we have an opportunity to examine and to say, what are we saying about what it means to be a man, and what is helpful in that, and what is harmful? And I think we could all just be more conscientious and reflective about what's behind the need to create hard definitions, Well,
let's talk about definitions for a minute. What some people, let's keep things separate in the interest of having inserting a little lightning into this conversation. Let's keep it separate. There's some women who will hear a man's definition of masculinity, and she will define that as toxic, whereas he will not. And there arises a wide gap that so far is very difficult for most people, men and women, to bridge. In other words, you have women speaking on how toxic masculinity negatively affects them and their children. And over here, you have men who go into that defensive position, and in their minds are thinking, this isn't toxic. This is just what being a man is about. So they feel attacked. And there's the basis for my question. Is masculinity, is manhood under siege? For some men, it is. For some men, It's not. For some women, they are conducting that siege. And for some women, they're there to support their husbands, brothers, friends. And some women have totally checked out due to trauma as a result of toxic masculinity. So do you see, I question how cut and dry the argument is. There's not a clear right and wrong. Of course, anything that is toxic that causes harm to others, physical, mental, emotional harm, is wrong. But in the discussion and in the debate, I can't see that it's a cut and dried us against them, right and wrong, toxic, non-toxic. What do you think?
I think it's a mistake if we frame this as one, as men against women, or I think if you want to have these conversations be meaningful and move the issue forward, there first has to be an establishment of some kind of a connection. So when I'm having conversations about, if it's about gender, conversations about race, religion, I want to first establish that the person in front of me, that we have a common understanding of the language that we're using. And also, it's always really important to me to understand what matters to you here, what's important to you about this. And, all human behavior is driven by, we're trying to get our needs met.
Sure. And that question, when presented to, in this case, to a man, demands that man engage in a little introspection.
Right.
Which will then hopefully bring him to some... See, and again, I play the devil's advocate when I say it's a men against woman thing. But that is very often how this discussion, how this argument is, if not presented in the media, at least it's felt that way by a large number of men. Now, I don't feel that way. I can, go in the kitchen and bake pink cupcakes with bunny ears for my kids. And in the next breath, I'm out lifting a world record amount of when I squat as a power lifter. So I'm secure in my masculinity, manhood. I have my soft side. I'll write a poem for my wife at the drop of a hat. But some of these things that I'm saying I'm comfortable with, a lot of men are not. How do we make men comfortable with those things? And should we even try to make men comfortable with those things?
Well, I don't think we can make another person comfortable. I think what's kind of interesting here is that from my perspective, it's the toxic masculinity that triggers that defensiveness.
I agree. Or at least insecurity. It could at least, if not toxic masculinity, it could be that this poor guy has some sort of trauma that he has yet to deal with. And it manifests itself in a very defensive posture where it should be an easy dialogue, but he gets defensive because of some prior trauma. That happens.
Well,
I'm not excusing all men, but I'm saying in some cases that is the issue, past trauma.
Sure. And I think that there's a lot of men that are, living in pain, living with pain, who feel alone, who don't feel that they have a real connection with other men or other women. And, gender is a script, and from birth, we're told how we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to be.
You wear blue,
so very
you wear
often,
pink. You play with dolls, you play with
cry.
A ball. Yeah.
Be a man. Boys don't do that. Yeah. That's not for boys. Yeah. And a lot of boys grow to become men who have not been given the room to reflect on, well, who am I actually? Because so much is society telling us how we're supposed to be, and us we have a desire for safety and for belonging, and we want to be accepted. So it takes work to ask yourself, for men to ask themselves, well who am I if I'm not checking these masculinity boxes?
And I'll take it a step further. There's a large segment of men, fathers, who are teaching their sons and other young people and other men in their circle of influence. They're teaching them to close off those things that allow a constructive dialogue, that allow introspection. So that is a fact. And I'm one who says that the main thrust towards solving toxic masculinity, it doesn't lie in the feminist movement, or it doesn't lie in the hands of women. It lies in the hands and the thoughts and actions of men themselves. In other words, more men should be speaking on this issue than what we're seeing, I think.
Yeah, I think that this is something that I think this requires all of us, because all of us have men that we love and care about. All of us are impacted by how our social context is defining and prescribing masculinity. So we're all invested in this.
Sure, absolutely.
And
we are one society. We are one society. But I do believe that more. I would feel better if I saw more men stepping up and speaking about this. It's happening. There's a change occurring, but come on, brothers. We're behind the game here. We need to step it up. We need to talk about it. We need to engage our wise women, sisters, wives, friends, just like I'm engaging you in conversation. Your way of approaching this issue on social media, I think, is quite impressive, and I think it makes a difference. I think there's a lot of meatheads out there who see some of the things that you write, and I think it causes them to stop and think for a minute. So I, as a man, thank you for that. And there you have it. Thank you all for listening in on this discussion. Again, this is the first installment in a series of discussions I'm going to be having both with guests and alone, where I deliver a monologue on the issue of masculinity. It needs to be spoken about. It needs to be learned about. It needs to be handled properly. So let's do that. Remember to keep watching, keep listening. Not every upcoming episode is going to be on masculinity. It's just going to be plugged in from time to time. So it's going to be the usual content plus this series on masculinity. Again, thank you all for being here. If you're listening or watching wherever you are, please subscribe so that you'll get a notice every time I come with a new episode. Okay? Thank you all so much. Be well.